I'm a bit eager to direct my videos towards the workings of the mind and all the fascinating stuff that comes out of it. Stories or ideas that can put a perspective to what and or who we are. And not just as humans, but all who are able to even feel a rudimentary form of consciousness. Which I strongly believe all life has in some way, be it the tiny little thoughts of an ant, to beings or networks of things with maybe even greater consciousness than the one we humans possess. A great place to start is with one of us, a very special and rare edition of our kind, long since past, but not forgotten. Not so well known outside Norway, I think, but a national treasure to the many who believe that he had some quite interesting psychic abilities, like telepathy, precognition, and the power of healing. The man I've titled the video with, Marcello, may even prove to be the very clue to the greatest mysteries of life. He was born on the 6th of July 1878 in Kongsberg, Norway. His name was Martin Mikael Thoriussen Haugen, and he later changed his name to Marcello Haugen. And he is the only person I have ever read about that you could convince me had actual psychic abilities beyond the realm of the causal mind. I'm easy to captivate, but in the end extremely hard to convince. I am just as skeptical of the unknown as I am fascinated about it. It's a simple equation, and mostly it ends up giving me ideas for some artistic creation, even if I find a supposed real deal event completely bonkers. Hardly ever does it make me want to go into a deep dive in fringe science. Marcello is different though. He was a whole other level. There's an entire book written about him, and all the stories people told about him, all the people who came to him for guidance, or to be cured for illnesses. The book has over 200 pages, and I'm not sure if you can get it in English. I do hope so. Marcello seemed like a very likable guy, and he was very much adored by women. His gypsy heritage, dark hair, tall, handsome, and very calm. Surely, if he was telepathic and actually knew what went on in women's minds, wow, I'm not sure if that's a blessing or a curse. But I think he found a middle way and didn't take advantage of it. And that also brings us to the very slight chance he was just a charlatan and a trickster who had learned how to manipulate people and do cold readings and similar things. But in my opinion, the odds for that becomes astronomical as more and more examples of his innate altruism are laid out in the book. Not altruism in the form of people who say they are altruists, and most often are just malignant narcissists, who constantly has to be the everyday hero. But more the kind of someone who aren't very interested in isms and has never heard about the word, but still shows great qualities in that direction. I'm pretty sure he was the real deal, but skepticism is important so that we keep our minds straight when we take a little rabbit hole dive into how Marcello perhaps can shed a light on our inner cosmos and its possibilities. Like for instance, a fascinating little anecdote from his early upbringing. I'm not going to go to depths in his personal life, because then I had to read the book again, and it has been a while since I read it. But to start the whole thing off, there was one very interesting thing his mother overheard in his early age, as she was out on a stroll with him, when he one day started pointing at passers-by's heads and said, "Look, there's starry heavens inside their heads too." His mother didn't know what to make of it, but if you grant him his supposed power of telepathy, it was obvious he was talking about the action potentials firing off inside people's brains, and it reminded him of the great starry heavens at night. In the late 18th century, a time where there was very little light pollution. I hope everyone, at least once in these days, has had a chance to look up at the Milky Way on a clear winter's day out on the countryside or in the mountains. A myriad of stars. And imagine somehow having a mind less polluted with all kinds of whatever distractions, so that they can actually see the constellations of twinkling neurons inside other people's heads. What a way to have your mind blown. Or maybe not. What a way to have your mind well informed about other people. Why not? If you have time to learn to interpret what you see. If to see is even the right word to use. Marcello in his later years was a great judge of character, and mostly I bet people who laughed at his supposed abilities stayed away from him. They had heard enough stories about his way of reading people to wisely stay away so their minds weren't read like an open book, you know? Just in case he wasn't the charlatan they most likely portrayed him as, and that they themselves got called out for their possibly corrupt inner workings. One time, on a promenade through town with friends, some drunk made rude comments to Marcello and started to act threatening towards him and his friends, whereupon Marcello calmly and politely stared him down, and the man suddenly fell ill to his stomach and had to rush off. There are a lot of weird instances like this. He once asked a woman who didn't believe in his abilities to hike up to his cabin, and he promised her that when she got up there she would find proof, because he predicted she would meet herself in the door. And when she finally arrived, she found a snake dwelling in the sun by the doorstep. After that, she started believing him. Were these actual examples of psychokinesis and precognition? Perhaps not. If you juggle your imagination a bit, a lot of things can come down to just being pure and simple telepathy of various advancements. And there have been some recent studies that suggest we may have that ability. Well, at least in a rudimentary way. But you know, there's always a new Mozart or Einstein or Da Vinci brewing in the evolution game. Why wouldn't it be the same with telepathy, if it is an actual feature of the mind? Maybe Marcello was the Mozart of telepathy. But what if Mozart was the only human with ears in the 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz sound frequency range? And all the rest of us was listening on a different range of hertz, and just seldomly could make anything out of his tunes, and just laughed his music off as mere Looney Tunes. So how could it be merely telepathy? Where's the fun in that? Not having all the powers, not being able to hang with A-list psychics, just being able to read their minds and all the secrets to how to become an A-list psychic? Yeah. Well, first of all, it's not only the brain that houses neurons. There's about 100 million of them in the gut and colon, making sure your digestive system is up to date and running. And there is only a few thousand connections between it and the mighty brain up on the penthouse level. So the gut neuron seems to work pretty independently and could perhaps be compelled by suggestions from outside forces. I mean, if he could somehow sense action potentials, could there also be a way that the very technique behind it opened up for a two-way connection? And, whether he understood it or not, could it give him the ability to suggest changes, even if it was just one simple power, a sudden triggering of a bowel movement in someone? Imagine if everyone on Earth had telepathic abilities like Marcello supposedly had. Imagine the culture we'd had. Now imagine the Mozart among the Marcellos, someone 1,000 times more gifted than him. Someone who could take complete control over others just by thinking, or some more advanced form of thinking, now that this new human being sees good old thinking as some rudimentary feature of the evolving brain. I feel it's a bit hard to wrap my rudimentary brain around this, since we're not even close to anything like it. So let's just for now go back to the second instance, the snake on the doorstep. Snakes have neurons too, and maybe this sort of snake liked it around the area of Marcello's cabin. And snakes are way more predictable than humans. And if you can read a human mind, how easy wouldn't it be to read a snake's? The chance of it taking a sunbath on a shiny day on its favorite spot wouldn't be hard to predict. Or to omit the guesswork, Perhaps even this underlying telepathy technique also allowed for short-term interconnection between minds of any size. At any distance that wouldn't come in conflict with the speed of light, of course, even if spooky actions at a distance, also known as quantum entanglement, could be introduced as a factor. But we're confined to the relatively small sphere of Earth, and so was Marcello. I'm not sure what to believe, but from a few personal experience I've come to believe that there's something in the air. When it comes to the healing Marcello did, it was mainly based on herbs and recipes that he had made and that he recommended. I mean, if he could see the firing of brain cells, why wouldn't he be able to sense the actions of other cells around the body and learn to tell if they were healthy or not? And maybe also tuning them back to a healthy standard using natural herbs. I think it's a real shame that we never got to really understand the mind of this fascinating guy. Maybe it was not much to understand. Maybe he was so overwhelmed with these abilities and put all his effort into helping people and had no time reflecting over why he had the abilities in the first place. What if he had spent his time studying people's brains instead, coming up with the first connectome of a living brain? A subway map over all the roots and possible roots in a modern brain. See yourself going around town and looking at all the different connectomes tirelessly working, reacting, shifting, evolving, and then comparing them to each other. Perhaps he already did, but he had no words to describe it, or he just kept it for himself, because he knew from picking up people's thoughts that they would never understand it anyway. Anyway, my own rudimentary telepathic experiences that probably are laughable from a telepathic A-lister's standpoint still gave me some reasons to be less doubtful about the magnificent Marcello. I could mention the t-shirt I had long lost that suddenly popped up in a dream, and then someone I know informed me the next day that they had found it under the sofa. But that's just too boring, even though I did like that shirt. And we do form emotional bonds with all sorts of inanimate stuff too, not just other humans. Even if the emotional bonds with clothes are mere light versions in that matter. Unless, of course, it was a favorite clothing that fitted really well and made people gaze and you got connected. It may be something to cry over, losing something like that. But it will never come close to the human-to-human bond, and the strongest links I have personally experienced involve both a bad breakup and a death of a relative. And they were in no way experienced due to me getting messages about the tragedies afoot and half-second delays in brain signaling that made me think I had formed a telepathic connection. No way indeed. No siree. I'll talk about that in the next video and sum it up somewhat. Because while writing this episode, I just felt it needed a little more deep dive and that there should be some breathing room in between. That means that if you are unlucky enough to being able to go to the next episode already some months into the future, perhaps go for a coffee first. Have an exceptional day and never stop being skeptical, even how strongly you want something to be real. And when it comes to telepathy, let's be real. Do we even want it to be real?